Okay, so thanks for joining us at our November chapter meeting and of the San Francisco Bay ISSA. We have member presenters today, and our first speaker is Varghese Palathuruthi, who goes by Babu. Babu is going to be talking about web application pen testing with Burp Suite. And this presentation gives an overview of Burp tools and its rich features. It'll include a quick tour of the lifecycle of a typical web application scan, some of the popular extensions from the Burp marketplace used by testers, and finally a look at Portswigger's Web Security Academy. Born and raised in Mumbai, India, Babu earned his degree in electronics engineering. He came to the United States during the dot-com boom. He mainly worked in the financial industry building web applications, then started focusing on application security in the last decade. Babu earned his master's degree in information security from the SANS Technology Institute. Currently, his interest is in cloud security, compliance, and controls. Babu lives in San Francisco with his family. Babu, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Okay, so let's get started. So Proxy Tool. Why do security testers and attackers both use proxy tools? A typical web application, if you see, have dynamic web pages to display content, and they are typically built using technologies such as HTML, JavaScript, style sheets. When you interact with these dynamic web pages, you typically have forms where you as a user can submit data to the backend server, right? Now, how does the backend server know that the data you're submitting is sanitized or if it's malicious or good input? So what typical web applications do is they add something called as a client-side validation on the web pages so that they make sure that whatever the input that the user has submitted is valid and is not malicious. What attackers and even security testers during their pen test do is they use some way to inspect the web application on the web browser and then inspect the data that is being submitted and then manipulate it before it goes to the backend server. So to automate a lot of these processes, they use something called as a proxy tool. A typical proxy tool is configured so that it is integrated or configured with the web browser, and then it listens at a particular port, and then whatever input that you as an attacker try to submit from the web browser or as, say, a man in the middle, it is able to intercept and then automatically manipulate or manually manipulate and then send it to the backend server. And the whole goal is to check for vulnerabilities that are there in the backend server and then try to exploit them. So that's the main reason why proxy tools are used. They're used, again, both by attackers as well as security researchers and testers. If you look at the history of proxy tools have been there for at least the last 20 or so years. I think in the open source world, Paros proxy and WebScarab were the initial popular proxy tool, and they were actually the precursor to the ORZ attack proxy, which is right now one of the most popular pen test tools used by security researchers. It is totally open source. Burp was created and released by Portswigger way back in 2003. Since then, it has evolved into a very sophisticated tool with a multitude of features and even more that you can add through extensions, also known as plugin, which you can download from the Burp App Store or Marketplace. Burp comes in, the Burp Suite comes in 3 flavors. There is the Burp Community Edition, which is open source and completely free. but it has very limited features. Burp Professional. Burp Professional is the one which is the most popular and which is commonly used by testers. It has all the features that you require, plus has unlimited access to all the Burp extension from the Burp App Store. What I would recommend is, instead of using the Burp Community Edition, I would recommend that you try out the 30-day trial of the Burp Professional Edition if you want to evaluate the tool. Finally, the most recent addition to the Burp suite is Burp Enterprise. Burp Enterprise Edition is something that runs on the cloud. You sign up with Portswigger, and then it runs on the cloud. And the great thing about Burp Enterprise is, like any vulnerability assessment tool like Tenable and Qualys, you can schedule and automate your scans, and then you can save and look at your reports on a wide range of timeline. Also, you can integrate it with Burp tracking tools or with your application continuous integration pipeline. So summary, this is how the Burp feature looks. So let me actually, at this point, open my Burp tool. Can you all see my screen? Just checking.
Yes, looks good.
Okay, so so typically you start your Burp Suite Professional Edition and you go through a wizard. And if you already have a project saved, then you choose that or you create a new one. So in this case, I'm going to start a Tomcat example project that I created. And then you load your configuration file. And then you start Burp. And once it loads, the first thing you're greeted is the dashboard. And right from the start, what Burp allows you to do is, whichever target application you're using, you can start a passive scan on a passive crawl on that application and also do a live audit. This helps you while you're doing your initial testing to evaluate the whole size of the application that you're testing, and also do some preliminary audit before you actually start a live scan. So this is the dashboard. The target tab is where it tracks all the web pages that you have so far tested. And what it really helps is you to do is you can customize and manage the scope. So for example, if I only want to scan one particular section of the application, this is where I can isolate it and then run a particular scan on that particular section. The scope tab is also very important because this is where you can restrict and narrow down the scope of your scan. For example, over here, I have configured that only use my Tomcat examples in the target scope. What this does is that when I run a scan, and when it's doing the, like for example, if I start my passive crawl, it tries to ensure that if there are JavaScript or images or style sheets that is external to my Tomcat application, let's say something that goes to Adobe or Google, it will ignore those in its audit or scan. So that is target. And then the next important tab is proxy. So this is probably the most important tab. What you can do here is specify how exactly you are able to use this particular thing, the Burp, as a proxy against your web application. Typically, when you run it against a web browser, what you do is, so let me start Firefox. So I've loaded my application over here. What I can do is go to settings in Firefox and enable proxy and make sure that, say, it's listening on port 8080. and then I enable it. And now I go back, and when I click enter over here, you see that Burp has already intercepted the request to that particular web application. So now you can use this proxy intercept tab to actually manipulate some of the values. If I say no cache, I can just remove these two entries and then see what exactly happens, and I forward the request. So that is just one example of what exactly happens with a proxy. So that is the proxy tab of Burp. You can always switch it off. And what will happen is that Burp will stop intercepting the request. It will still act as a proxy, but it will stop intercepting the request. So that's the option tag. One thing which I wanted to point out is when I specify the port number, make sure that this port number coincides with the port number that you configured in the web browser. So in the web browser, of course, I said 8080. So make sure the same settings is present in your proxy tool. The other one is typically for web browser. When you use your web browser to test your application and use Burp as a proxy, you choose the loopback only option. However, you can also use Burp to test other applications like, let's say, an Android emulator, or you can actually test traffic from a mobile app, such as the Android emulator or an iOS simulator. In those cases, what you do is you need to change your binding from loopback to all interface. So that's one difference that I've done. And then if you are going to listen to another IP as a proxy instead of your local host, then you specify it here. That's a third option. So that's the proxy tab. When you're running your scan, you can automate a lot of those intercept requests through two tabs known as the intruder and the repeater. With the intruder, what you can do is when you're making a request, let's say, let me make another request over here. If I refresh this page, it goes to proxy, intercept. I can right click and then say send to intruder. And I can also right click and say send to repeater. So what now happens is that you get a payload at a particular positions, and then you can change each of these values using a particular variable, and then using a payload, you can choose from various different payloads and then add those payloads to the particular intruder list. And then what happens is that you can start an attack, and then it will automatically iterate through your payload list and then attack that particular application. And the same thing you can do with the repeater. You can specify various variables and then modify different query parameters and attributes.
Babu, so just to clarify, you're on one laptop, you have the Burp Suite proxy running, and then it's listening on a certain port. And then you're also running Firefox, and you had in your Firefox settings, you said to send all HTTP requests to that proxy and on its port, right? And then you're also running as a target web server example, you have Tomcat running, right, on a different port. So you're kind of doing it all in one machine. It's can get a little confusing when I first did that, but I just wanted to clarify that because that helps me. And the part about when you manipulate requests, you have to stop it between the browser and the server, right? It kind of holds up the request that you would have made to the server, then you can change it and continue.
That is correct. Actually,
right?
Yeah, they are very valuable points. I should have clarified. So just for this example, I am running my web application on my system on this port 10.148, but now I'm running my proxy tool also on the same system on 8080.
Gotcha.
And I'm also testing that particular web application using my browser. But I want to make sure that when I'm testing for my web browser, it goes through my Burp proxy. So that's why I need to configure a different port called as 8080. And actually, that's a good segue. That brings us up to another feature of Burp. What happened was I think since early last year, 2020, Burp came with its own embedded web browser. So you no longer need your Firefox. All you need to do is open, it comes with its own embedded Chromium web browser. And then now from the Chromium web browser, let me just open. So because of this feature, you no longer need to configure or modify your the browser that you're using to test. Configure it to have a port number on a proxy at a particular port number. Instead, all you need to do is just use the embedded browser that it comes with. So let me go back, see if this is working.
This is great. Are you going to tell us a little bit about what kind of common attacks can be, or things that I can find out about my web app, common vulnerabilities, or
yes?
Like
so if you go back to the target section, and you see issue definition, and in the issue definition, it lists all the typical attacks that it can simulate and also find that particular vulnerability. So here's the complete list: injection, all the types of injections. In fact, you can see most of them are injection attacks, and then there is cross-site scripting, which is a very popular type of attack. Request smuggling, just I think 6 months ago, Apache Tomcat had a serious request smuggling issue. And in fact, it was a Burp researcher who discovered that issue. And it's you can launch this particular attack, web cache poisoning, various kinds of WebSocket attacks, client-side, expath injection. And then this is the one, external service interaction, which Patrick, I think you should be quite aware of working at OneIP. Basically, what Burp does is it has its own collaboration server, and when it launches an attack, it does a ping request from the tool, and then it hits the web application, and the payload is written in such a way that it sends a request from the web application to the Burp collaborator server that it has in the backend. And the Burp collaborator server records it and then writes reports of vulnerability saying that your target web application is making all these anonymous requests to unknown servers. So that's what this external service interaction is about. Another thing, so I want to mention the extender tab. So this is where you add various different extensions to the Burp tool. If you go to the B app store, you will see various extensions that you can add, and they are given various ratings. The ones which I have used, one is retire.js, and the other is J2e Scan. Retire.js lets you find various JavaScript vulnerabilities that you have in your web application. And J2e Scan is typically meant for your web applications that are built on the Java Enterprise Edition stack. It has a common set of test cases that it runs to find vulnerabilities that you find typically in a Java Enterprise Edition type of application. So a Burp scan lifecycle. So what's the typical lifecycle of a Burp scan? I think a lot of how you run Burp as a tester depends upon how much time you have been allocated to run a scan. Typically, when you have a pen test engagement, or you call a pen test company to run an audit on your particular application at your company, they might have a certain number of days or weeks to run scan. And sometimes when you are doing a test by yourself, you might only have a limited amount of time, let's say 2 to 4 hours or maybe 12 hours. And it's important to understand the time you have to run your scan. And the reason is because if you have a large application to scan with thousands of functionalities and a lot of pages, but even running an automated scan can take 12 hours to a day. It can just keep on running because it's doing this passive crawl and trying to scan each and every one of them. So make sure that you plan how you run your Burp scan. When I run scans, the time allocated to me against a web application is 2 to 4 hours. So what I do is, start a scan, start the tool like I just did, activate the passive scan and the audit and the live audit, then start testing the application. So let me see. If I go, I have proxy intercept off. Okay, intercept is off, and then I can start going through various pages. This is just a example application. I would say in the web application you're testing, you go through the various functionality. You might have to log in. You might have to test various different controls. You might have to log in as an admin, as a regular user, as an anonymous user. So just go through each and every test you have. Pay particular attention to new functionality. If it's a web application that you have been testing for a while, then you probably have it in your test case or your configuration, what those existing pages look like. You just need to pay attention to the new features that have been added. So pay particular attention to those. Those new functionalities, if you want to test, that's when you maybe turn on your intercept option, and then when you run it, just see what exactly it is inspecting and try to manipulate it and see what kind of vulnerabilities Burp is able to find. So here's one. Let's see, test, and then actually let me intercept is on, and test 1, 2, 3, and I submit it. And here you can see this is how you manipulate it. The value submitted was test 1, 2, 3, but I can change it to 500. So just and you can see the output, instead of being test 1, 2, 3 is now test 500. That's just a simple example of how you're able to use the Burp tool to manipulate the payload and submit it to the server to find different kind of vulnerabilities. So you run, finish your smoke test, and then what you do is leave the crawl and the audit going as it is, and you see it has already started posting some results on the right. Go back to the target tab, sitemap, and here you'll see it has already started reporting some issues. What you do is right click on the particular section you want to scan, and then click on the scan tab, click on audit selected items. Now you will see a lot of pages listed here. One thing I would like to do is consolidate them, and what I do is one of the things which I do is I leave this unchecked, but whatever pages or artifacts that you do not want to scan, like for example, I want to scan JS, but I don't want to scan GIF, JPEG, PNG, CSS, SVG. So click that and then click next. And then you'll see now the total number of items that it's going to scan is 56. And then click OK, and then OK again. And then at the dashboard, you'll see a third section that has popped up where it's now starting to audit. This is the live active scan. And you'll see the amount of issues that it has found has increased over here. So this keeps going on. And when you go over here, you'll see whatever number of items that it has found.
So the scan, sorry, Babu, the scan crawls the site, and
yes,
it looks for every element and cross page references to itself. So when someone says they do a Burp Suite scan, that really includes interactive work too, usually, right? Like an actual somebody actually has to scan it and then go back and decide what they want to manipulate to find vulnerabilities.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes, and that is why, like I mentioned, you have to plan your scans, because the more manual scan you do, the better the result that you can get, the less the false positive. But again, it takes a lot of time. This is why when you have a pen test engagement with an external contractor, you give them like a week or a few days to run the scan, because like you said, they have to do these manual tests, inspect the tool, and then configure and run their own custom payload. But if you wanted to do a simple automatic scan like I did quickly, then if you have just 2 hours to run a scan, I would suggest just go with what Burp already provides.
Gotcha. And Babu, we got about 5 minutes. Do you want to leave any time for questions or?
Yeah, let me just wrap it up.
Okay,
so just let me show the report then. So finally, you can go to the Burp tool, click issues, report issues for this branch. I typically choose HTML and then do the different severities, sort by, ask for the full request and response in the payload. And then I like to sort by severity and then generate the report. And the report looks like this. This is the typical report that I get. So once I get the report, I review the report. A lot of times there might be some false positives, and I ignore those or make a note of them saying why it is a false positive. And whatever is remaining, the plan that I use is for high severity issues, convey to the engineering team so that they fix it as soon as possible, probably as a hot fix. Medium severities, I recommend that they are fixed in the next release. And low and informational, you can just fix it later in the roadmap. Okay, so finally, what I wanted to mention was Web Security Academy. So one great thing which Portswigger has provided is Web Security Academy. This is a great portal for you to learn about various types of web securities and web security vulnerabilities that are present. All you need to do is create an account, it's free, and just go through all the different labs which are provided. And then you accumulate points. You can be an apprentice, practitioner, or an expert based on the number of points you have. One caveat is a lot of the advanced labs, you do need a Burp Professional Edition license. You cannot just do it by inspecting the lab application from your web browser. So that's all I have. Question.